Heading into this year's budget, the Assembly of First Nations was asking for $44 billion over 10 years to address the serious gap in on-reserve housing. What the Trudeau government is actually investing is $2.4 billion over 5 years. AFN National Chief RoseAnne Archibald says she is not happy about the massive discrepancy between the two figures, and says it is high time the government entered into a serious discussion with First Nations on economic reconciliation.
I really feel that we need to change our financial relationship with Canada. All of the wealth from Canada is being made on First Nation lands, whether those are unceded territories or treaty lands. The wealth of this country has to be shared with First Nations.
Métis priorities were also given a more prominent role in last year's budget and had their own section. This year, Métis people are only mentioned once, when the government pledged $190 million over 7 years to address housing in Métis communities. Métis National Council President Cassidy Caron says this is clearly not enough, but it is a start.
Any little bit is helpful. That $190 million over 7 years for housing in Métis communities is on top of, like I've already said, the $500 million over 10 years investment that has been negotiated through the permanent bilateral mechanism. So we do already have some funding allocation, some funding investments from the federal government. This is another top up, but I will always continue to advocate for more funding for housing for our communities.
Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Mark Miller acknowledges 2022 is a smaller budget when compared to last year, which included record spending to address the COVID-19 pandemic. But Miller says investment in Indigenous initiatives are still significant, and the crisis in First Nations housing cannot be addressed in one budget.
Is it enough to close the housing gap? It is not. When you look at the through a lens of reconciliation, one budget doesn't encapsulate the need to put in sustained investments year over year in closing those socioeconomic gaps.
As for the Native Women's Association of Canada, in a released statement, they say they're pleased with the investments in social services, housing, education, and healthcare. However, they say they're disappointed that no additional funds have been set aside to address the violence and genocide against women mentioned in the final report on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.